you gave up 6 figures. What kind of gems would you drop to make that jump into entrepreneurship?
What happens if you mess up? The downside is actually not that bad.
Why do you think we're not setting up as many businesses as we should?
I think it's completely down to mindset and how we as a community have been brought up. A lot of us have not necessarily come from wealth. You and I, when we make our investments, they need to be circling back to entrepreneurs, to building houses and providing the home financing for our community. In a bank, you actually lend the bank money. That is then used to finance all sorts of things, sometimes good, but often bad. The relationship there is an on-demand deposit. What is this on-demand thing? What does Islam actually mean? But why do you actually believe in God? Do you believe in God? We're living through probably one of the most chaotic periods in history, and until we do change that, our mission is unfulfilled. Get better. Not small. They're not small. Big tweaks.
Ready?
Let's do it.
Perfect. Ibrahim, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Second time on the podcast, but first time on the Muslim Pound.
I know. It's a massive upgrade.
You think? So you think this is better than my office?
I think your office was pretty good, to be fair. But the excitement that one gets, where one isn't really sure, is one being led to a dawn shooting or podcast, is a lot more exciting.
We actually had that because someone actually, when they came in for the podcast, she was like, where am I being taken? And then she went on Instagram Live. She goes, I'm just with 2 guys we've never met before, and they've taken me somewhere, and it's meant to be for a podcast, and I'm sure it'll be all good. And then she said, okay, this is a studio, so it seems fine.
It was all right.
She
was actually genuinely worried.
I think it was half worried and half
just in case.
Just in case.
I'm sure there are actually, murderers out here who use
East London.
Yeah, it's true.
So Ibrahim, big question. What does a Muslim pound mean to you?
The Muslim pound means the idea that we as a community, we stick together. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Stick, hold tight to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and don't be divided. And if we think back to Abdurrahman ibn Auf and his brother, that the Ansari brother, I can't remember the name of the Sahabi. To me, that's an epitome of that, where he said, look, I'll give you money. I'll even divorce one of my wives. I'm not sure how the wife felt about this, by the way. I always wondered about that. I'll do that, and I'll do it so that you're set up. So, off you go kind of thing. And that was the level of wanting to look after each other economically, which I think that epitomizes for me what the Muslim pound means.
So why is that, do you think, important in this day and age?
Well, we're living through probably one of the most chaotic periods in history that we've ever seen. And in that this tumultuous kind of maelstrom that we're working our way through, now more than ever, we as a community need to stick together and look after each other, because we are weak, unfortunately, and that has implications for how our political kind of power looks like, both here in the UK, but then also globally as well. We're seeing what's happening in Gaza right now. We're seeing what's happening, frankly, in the USA right now as well. And the reality is that there's no one to actually step up and do anything about it. And that's because we've been sleepwalking into a complete, corner and not even realizing it. And one of the most important things that we can be doing, because I feel like what happens is that because we've been often so downtrodden economically, we have this kind of slave mentality where it's just all, everyone is just kind of looking out for themselves, and we just need to make enough money to feed our families, right? So it's like the classic, all of these KFCs and chicken shops and all of the Uber drivers, and everyone is their own little business, which is good, but they're all competing against one another. And when you have that kind of setup, what ends up happening is, you're only looking out for number one, and you're only looking out for yourself. And you project that en masse, and ultimately you end up in a place where, as a community, we're not actually optimizing for the collective. And that is, going back to the slave point, that is exactly where they want us to be. That is exactly where, if you're divided and you're weak and you're looking after just your own goals, that is where, when you're in the corner, there's no way of getting out of there.
How do we actually unite? Because I walked down Ilford Lane 5 years ago, there was probably not a single chai shop. 10 years ago, probably not a single chai shop. Now you've got chaiwala, and all of a sudden, every other shop does Cur8 chai. And my dad actually says it, because kids at home, they don't have their mum's Cur8 chai, but now all of a sudden they want to pay £2, £3, £4 for a cup of tea. But how do we actually unite and say, you know what, there's actually one big brand here who are doing well. There's probably a few competitors, Cur8 chai, me chai. But where's our unity going to come from?
Well, we did a video on this. I don't know if you saw that.
I saw that.
I'm possibly persona non grata on Ilford Lane now, as a result of that, where I made this exact point about chaiwala and it's all of its pretenders. I think the answer lies probably in two things. One is an increase in creativity and an increase in self-belief, and I think that in itself, we can probably unpack it, is a deeply societal thing. There's a socioeconomic aspects to why is it that someone who is born in Ilford and is at a certain age sees a chaiwala and thinks, I'm going to set up, chaiwali next door. Why is it that he or she thinks that, rather than, okay, I need to actually come up with my own concept and think from first principles? Why does that happen? So that's one thing. And then I think the second thing is, because it goes back to my first point about the mentality being wrong. The second thing is that, people don't have that mindset that everything that I'm doing is for the akhirah. Everything that I'm doing is part of, to the, irtifa, or, i'zaz kalimatillah, right? There's none of that thinking there about how we are doing this for a reason. And then under that, one of the key important things is unity and coordination and jama'ah, and you're looking after the ummah. And then if you're approaching it from that mindset, inevitably you're going to end up in a very different place. But if you don't have that mindset, then instead that gets replaced with a mindset of I guess Western liberalism, which is the atomistic individual who is looking to maximize their self-pleasure and to survive in this capitalist world.
The American dream. So then, if it's a mindset issue, and I do think our South Asian community, or our South Asian Muslim community, do have a survival plus poverty mindset, which is kind of, I don't blame the older generation, but the younger generation kind of have to now take over that mantle and have a building mindset. That's why you get brands like yourself, Wahid, and plenty of other brands that we've seen. So how do we kind of shift the mentality of one whole generation from poverty to a building mindset? Because ultimately, I think that's very key in the whole Muslim circular economy.
Yeah. I think it comes back to, the point about Gibran and Khalid, right? Who sets up chaiwali next door to chaiwala. Like, why do they do that? I think part of it is that you need role models. and you need inspiration. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is like how are we as a community, going to help Gibran and Khalid have that confidence to be able to even think that something is possible. I think that's at the heart of it, because the reason why I think many people like Gibran will go and set up a chaiwali is because they're like, oh, chaiwala works, he is making money, therefore I'll do something quite similar, chaiwali, and that will also make money. But he doesn't have the bravery to think, oh, you know what? I am going to come up with something entirely different. I am passionate and interested in and have the space and the free time and also the just general interest about the world that, I'm going to do this random thing, right? And I'm going to set up a shop that sells, drones on Ilford Lane. Maybe there's a gap for that. Maybe there is. And that's what I'm going to go into.
I think also our Jewish friends also do this very well. And there's always an example that I use. We have to do gas certificates as part of our management. So there's one Muslim landlord, there's one Jewish landlord. This is a true story. We charge about 50 quid. The Muslim landlord basically said to us, well, why did you get it done? We could have done it for 25. The Jewish landlord said, no, you don't do it. Our Jewish gas engineer will do it and he'll charge us £90. So I was like, why? He goes, because he's part of our community and we're going to support him. So he has a pool of landlords who will always go to him. So his business is there. And that kind of made me thinking is, okay, you've seen Chaiwala do well and you believe in their model clearly because Khalid wants to start Chaiwali. But then why don't you give them value in their supply chain or distribution chain? Why don't you say, you know what, these cups, I can make them better. Or your branding, I'll make them stand out more. Your content, I'll make it better. And I think that gap is something we're missing.
Yeah. I think it's really honourable. It's a good thing that they're looking to help their own, community to prosper by giving them that business. I don't know though if that is necessarily the best thing. I think there is some truth to that. I think there is some truth to we try and help out a Muslim business person if all else things considered, they're roughly there or thereabouts. But I actually think that it's not just about, look, we're not going to set up a competitor to Chaiwala just because we don't want to compete with a Muslim. I think the starting place is wrong with that. The starting place to set up anything, right? To set up anything in business or to set up anything, frankly, in life is, what is this problem that we really deeply care about? And how are we going to try and solve that problem? What is this like? How can I bring my creativity to bear on the world as I see it and put my stamp on the world in a way that is unique and compelling and comes up with something? I think if that mindset isn't there, then we are necessarily going to have to fall back on, okay, guys, whatever you come up with, you shouldn't really be competing with Chaiwala because everyone else is out there. I actually think, frankly, if someone wants to compete with Chaiwala, great, right? If they come up with Chaiwali, maybe not Chaiwali, right? But if they come up with something, if they come up with a concept and there's good reason for that and they've come up with it from first principles, then brilliant, right? Because we actually should be encouraging that as much as we can. And if that results in 20, Chaiwalas, then so be it. But I don't think it will, because creativity doesn't work that way. And you would probably end up with 2, 3, or 4 maybe very unique and different concepts, and then you kind of see who wins.
But then it's also, I think, about the vision as well, isn't it? One is like, I've got this shop, sustains my family, I'm happy. One thing you said on our first podcast is to give yourself permission to think big. Now that's what, for example, Chaiwala have done, Heavenly Desserts have done. They've just gone global now. But a lot of the 20 brands won't. The 20 other shops on Ilford Lane won't. And probably 5, 6 of them would unfortunately shut down because the supply outweighs the demand.
Yeah.
So how can we how do we change this mindset now that we need to start thinking a lot bigger? Because effectively, if Muslim businesses are in different areas and they do good, they fit different criteria the community needs. Chaiwala is our pub, basically. It's perfect for our pub or our cafe in the morning. Heavenly Desserts has something else. IFG has something else. Wahid has something else. So they're all different parts of the ecosystem. So then how do we kind of shift our mindset to more community-based mindset? So this is what my community needs now, and this is the problem that is deeply affecting me, and this is how we run with it and fix it.
Yeah. The framework that I use with businesses or institution building or anything is, put it in the frame of a problem. What is the problem that you're actually trying to solve here? And there might be overlaps, but there's lots of different problems, and different people are making attempts at solving them. And if someone is solving a problem really well and they're doing a great job at it, then it doesn't make sense that looks like it's potentially solved problem. It doesn't look like there's much more innovation that you can bring to it which would actually elevate the solution. And so if I think that, I don't know, High Castle is doing a great job at the whole estate agency side of things, or if I think, I don't know, that some property developer, your dad, or there's so many different property developers who are doing a great job at something, is it better to come at it with a completely new thing, or can I be joining forces with them and looking to try and improve them, because they've got the bandwidth as well actually to improve and really come up with something compelling, or do I want to come and do my own thing? I think that the option for both is always open, but I think the determinant is on the solution that you come up with. Is it a solution that is actually doing a half decent job for the problem? And if it is, then it's actually much more interesting, I find, to focus on this other problem over here, which is completely different.
Why is that? Why would you focus on that other problem?
Because it's a blue ocean problem, where if you've got this concept of blue ocean versus red ocean, where red ocean whaling terminology is where this comes from, where you've got a red ocean, which is a heavily hunted ocean where blood has already been spilt, whales have been found, and there's lots of people who are hunting in those seas. Blue ocean is uncharted territory where you don't really know what you're going to find, but if you actually find something really good, then you're going to be the only one there, and as a result of that, you're going to be able to gain a lot more out of it. So blue ocean is that's why I think we should go for blue ocean.
It's kind of like just entering a new market and all the customers will gravitate towards you.
Yeah.
So what would you say your ideal Muslim ecosystem is in terms of business?
What do you mean
by
that?
Like a circular economy. So what would you say? So it always starts, I believe it starts with a business and ends with us funding businesses. But what would you say within all of that whole circular movement, what do you think it should be?
So I think within a circular economy, you have, I guess within an economy as a whole, you have the financial sector, and then you probably layer on top of it. I mean, it ultimately comes down to human behavior, right? So you've got financial sector, you've got probably the consumer side of things, both consumables, but then also long-term stuff as well, and then you've got health, education, and then probably you have services, both that are more basic level services, perhaps the construction business or the trades, and then you've got some advanced level services where you probably need some kind of qualifications, such as, I don't know, a accountant or an engineer or a lawyer or someone like that, software engineer. So I think you've got that kind of spread of different things, and within each of those, you've got businesses that tie communities together within each of those little areas that are looking to solve or service, particular needs of the community. And I think it's quite natural that you see, a coagulation or a, unifying around certain, key brands that have over time proven themselves in that space. Murad Tiles is, I guess, a recent example of that, right? Or that because I've been renovating our house. Or you have, I guess, in the finance or investment space, you've got Wahid, IFG, perhaps Nesta,
Kestrel.
Kestrel maybe, and so these companies have perhaps achieved cut through over a long period of time, and so you have this kind of general equilibrium that develops, and people start focusing on those. So in my view, I think in the Muslim circular economy, as much as possible, rather than trying to replicate, because particularly these rather quite complex systems, right, where Murad Tiles or I don't know, Euro Packaging or some large company like that, it's not easy to build that, especially over time. So rather than trying to replicate that, definitely we should try and support businesses like that. And I think one thing that I don't think we've quite got there yet, and these businesses perhaps need to become larger to be able to support that, is being able to take our graduates or our youth and be able to absorb them up sufficiently into these businesses, because the businesses are not big enough to actually absorb up all of the youth coming through. And so you do have this kind of gap where 95% of the youth end up having to go to the mainstream world and doing their own thing, and then not enough of them are actually setting up businesses such that for the next crop coming along there are enough businesses to absorb. So I think the way that we try and solve for that is using the businesses that we already have and really trying to look to scale those as much as possible, but then also by encouraging more people into entrepreneurship.
Why do you think we've got so many people who go out to the mainstream and then don't set up businesses? Do you think is a risk element? Like people are just scared to make that risk because they've got a good amount of income coming in. Why do you think we're not setting up as many businesses as we should?
Yeah, I think it's completely down to mindset and how we as a community have been brought up at times, where we a lot of us have not necessarily come from wealth, and so that has an element of imprisoning the mind, where one doesn't feel like one can take the risk. And I have met so many people who are incredibly bright and gifted and talented, and they've been to some of the top universities, they've worked in the city, they're brilliant at execution, and yet and I've seen them, most of them will take the wrong, I don't know if the wrong is the word, but most of them will decide not to go down the entrepreneurial route. They will decide to get themselves a mortgage and become a director at some big tech company or some bank, and then they will just settle in for the next 10, 20, 30 years to just harvest and become a really fat cow, right? And rather than becoming the farmer that actually herds the cows and or possibly slaughters some of them as well. Maybe the analogy is perhaps breaks at that point, but that's what happens. And you choose the path to either be the docile follower or the shepherd, and they have all of the skill sets of becoming the shepherd, but they don't do it because of where they come from. And where they come from, this is too much money now to lose. It's too much, and they can't give that up. But in order to be an entrepreneur, you need to be able to risk it all to give it up, and that's where I think we end up losing.
That's interesting. You mentioned shepherds. All our prophets were shepherds. So that's quite an interesting analogy to use. Also, you gave up 6 figures to go full time into IFG. So what kind of gems would you drop to the people who are scared to make that jump into entrepreneurship?
We are living in, I think, the 5th largest economy in the world. There's 80 million of us. Let's actually do the maths on that. Is that 0.1%? Let's do the maths. There's 8 billion people in the world, right? That's 8 billion divided by 80 million. Yeah. So we're 1%. There's 100. Yeah. So 1% of the world is in the UK right now. And of that 1%, we are less than, 10% of that. So we are in that 0.1% of the world or less that has the privilege of living in the 5th largest economy in the world that is also Muslim. And what happens in the UK if you end up, really struggling financially? You will end up on universal credit. You'll end up with a social welfare system that supports you. And you have this safety net. Our community, our extended family, for most of us will support us. We've got food banks out there that support us. So you kind of really visually think through what happens if you mess up. And the reality, you can do an Uber, right? What happens if the downside, comes about? The downside is actually not that bad. Really, if you think about it, the downside is not that bad. We're not going to die. And if we're not going to die, then, great. Because in most other places, you would actually be potentially looking at a very, very difficult situation where you're struggling literally to eat and feed yourself. Now, if we have that privilege, that immense privilege of being in that 0.1% of the world where we can actually go for our dreams and take those risks and have that massive outcome potential, and the downside is really limited, then really, what is it that's stopping us?
So a lot of people say it's funding. Some people say it's just that fear of failure and the feeling they get inside them if they fail, and what would the parents say, what would the family say? How do we get over that? What was your mindset when you were thinking of, because when you were thinking of leaving, some of these thoughts must have crossed your mind.
I think I was quite lucky. So that there's the pragmatic thought, which is that, okay, one thing I really should sort out is getting myself onto the housing ladder, and getting the deposit together to get an Islamic mortgage to buy the house, which you then helped us sell many, many years later. So that was the pragmatic side. But frankly, everything else was like, okay, well, when I was a trainee, I was on 40-odd thousand as a salary. And sure, now I am, getting a much larger salary. That's 3 or 4 times that. 3 or 4 times that. But I know that just a year ago, I was actually living the salary of a trainee, and it was fine. It was perfectly fine. So I made sure that my expenses didn't expand according to my salary. And as a result of that, it wasn't that much of a leap. That actually, I can quite easily sustain a much lower salary. So that's the first practical point. The second point, which meant that I genuinely wasn't that worried about it, was 2 things. The first is from a financial perspective, we had actually got the business to a point where, alhamdulillah, I was making decent money and it could support us. So we were quite purposeful about actively going out and, looking to build that revenue. And so that means that, okay, right, you never really know what's going to happen the next month in business, but at least, you've got a track record of at least 6 to 9 months that shows that, this is something that can work. And then the final thing I'd say is just having the right mindset. That, there's a poem by Imam Shafi'i, Tawakkaltu fi rizqi ala Allahi khaliqi wa ayqantu anna Allah la shakka raziqi. I relied on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for my rizq, ala Allahi khaliqi wa ayqantu anna Allah la shakka raziqi. And I'm completely believe that there is no one else other than him who is my raziq. لا شك رازقي وما يقول من رزق فليس يفوتني ولو كان في قاع البحار العوامق. And whatever there is written for me in rizq, that it will come to pass, even if it is at the bottom of an ocean, right? ولو كان في قاع البحار العوامق سيأتي به الله العظيم بفضله ولو لم يكن من اللسان بناطق. That the majestic, the Azim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will make it come so that actually it comes to pass. even if my tongue doesn't even move, He will make that happen. ففي أي شيء تذهب النفس حسرة وقد قسم الرحمن رزق الخلائق. So in that context, then why is it that people are worried about these things when the Ar-Rahman, the merciful, the most powerful, has taken an oath about the rizq of the creation? It's on Him. And the birds, they go out every morning. The birds go out hungry. They don't have a welfare system. They don't have universal credit. They don't have a regular salary or a job. And yet, the one who can feed the birds when they come back at night, with their bellies full, He is the same person that has created us and controls our risk as well. And if that's the case, then from a mindset perspective, we should feel completely liberated.
So essentially, we should be tying our camel in working hard, and the risk will come. And it's funny you say that. And even if it's in the bottom of the ocean, on my desk today, I received a tin of coffee from a random farm in Brazil.
All right.
So, and in my head, I was thinking, one of my admin staff, she's new, and her uncle lives in Brazil. And she goes, "You like coffee, so here it is." So in my head, I was thinking, that farmer, when he was farming for his coffee beans, somehow that one or two of them coffee beans were written for me. Somehow, that's if it's written for me. I might end up giving it somewhere else. But a lot of that happens, and if you think about it, you're right, because where do we get our fruit from, or where do we get our food from? Literally on our plate, nothing's pretty much from this country. Everything's from abroad. So if our names have been written on grapes in Peru, for example, then of course our risk will be written. And I think that mindset is a very powerful mindset to have, but it's something we lack. And it's something I will ask, why do you not teach that in masjids?
Why is it not taught in masjids?
Yeah. Are you fed up with bad tenants? Are you struggling to sell or buy a property? At High Castle Estates, we know property isn't always easy, but that's why we're here. We help landlords secure reliable tenants fast. We help sellers sell with confidence and achieve the best price. We help buyers find the right home without the hassle. Property is stressful, but with the right team, it doesn't have to be. So, if you're looking to sell, rent, or buy a home, get in touch today at High Castle Estates in East London. You can find the details in the description below.
Because the people in charge of teaching in the masajid probably don't have that mindset themselves. They are products of a system that, especially on the Islamic side, they're products of a system where they haven't been taught about the economic side, full stop. B, they haven't been taught about how we need to bring a holistic, total Islam version of Islam to bear. And often it's just the Islamic stuff that is taught about in the masajid. But if you understand Islam in its totality, then actually you understand that all of these things are part of it. And so the path to salvation is the path through normal life. It's not a path where you have to wear a topi and a jubba and you have to look and behave in a certain way and start saying G and instead of yes. And if you get what I'm trying to say, it's not like trying to become an ascetic. It's not trying to become Bijara Pope Francis. That is not the way of Islam, right? Islam is not a religion of rahbaniyya. It's not a religion of rabbis and priests and asceticism. It's a religion of living life to the full, but living it in a total Islam way. And the people that are in charge of our masajid are not necessarily people that have that. And that's our fault. Our fault as a community, because we have broken Islamic education down to where it is today.
It's interesting you say that, because when I was younger, I was brought up in a very hardcore Gujarati area, so you can imagine how it is. So literally, you'd walk into a masjid with forgetting your topi, your topi's in your pocket. You get dirty looks from the elders, and they'll tell you off. And that's how it was. So I grew up thinking, you know, you need to have a long beard, you need to wear your jubba, you need to wear your topi. It has to be everywhere. I used to go to job interviews like that. But then after I got into the real world, and then I met certain people, and I'm like, well, this person's actually doing really good work, but he just looks normal. He doesn't look overly Islamic. And then as I'm going further and then I met people like you, and you're doing incredible work in the Muslim ecosystem. So is Suleiman, so is Arib, so is Suhail from Chawala, so many different people, and they're just normal people. There's not a certain look about them. And then going even further, when the pictures of the Palestinian martyrs were coming, I remember speaking to my cousin about this. We've been brought up in Forest Gate, Ilford, and we've been told you have to look a certain way. These people are shaheed, and they look like the people we're told not to look like, in terms of the haircut's wrong or they don't have a full beard. So that's when it kind of got me thinking that, have we been taught completely wrong, or just a very hardcore method? Because Islamic finance is very important. That doesn't get brought up in masjids. Maybe the certain ulama don't have the qualification to bring that up on Fridays. Islamophobia is important. That doesn't get brought up as much. Politics is important. Like, for example, MEND and Muslim vote. These things should also be brought up, but they're not. So now, I think where I am personally in a position is that the whole ecosystem, and part of it's where the Muslim pound has been brought, is you've got businesses who will then build their own infrastructure and help other businesses. But then these will be the fundamental key donors to our charities, to our politics, to our youth, to our drugs problem that we have, because essentially they'll donate to help a problem they deeply care about. And essentially that would also go towards funding a whole load of other businesses, like you're doing with Muslim Tech Fest.
Yeah. It's, I think it's also a mindset thing, because in fact, I think it's entirely a mindset thing. Like if you have the right people who create large businesses, then the monies that flow through the community will find their way to the right places. If you have the wrong people who create large businesses, they are not from the community, nor do they care about the community, nor will they spend on the community. That's not a failure of their ambition or their success or their execution, because they got all of that right. It's a failure of mindset. So it's not, what we're talking about here is not just that we want success for the sake of success. It's that we achieve success as a byproduct of doing what He, the Almighty, wants from us, and the demand from Him is to use our efforts in the best way possible to try and get to Jannah. And for many people, that actually looks like solving real problems, and for many people, that looks like entrepreneurship. And this is where it links back to the masjid point, which is that the same reason why we don't necessarily have the entrepreneurs, especially those entrepreneurs who are practicing and kind of keep their faith with them, is the same reason why we don't have the masjid that is teaching all of these other things, because neither has understood Islam properly and fully. Like, if the masjid and the imams and the musallis, they actually fully understood what Islam is about, then the entire outlook of the community would suddenly look very different. I'll give you an example of certain masajid that I think are very good, like for example Green Lane Masjid, Birmingham, or British Muslim Heritage Centre in Manchester, or I've not been there recently, but I think we historically Redbridge Islamic Centre or Lewisham, I think are all shining beacons of what the art of the possible is, where you've got the youth engaged, you've got all sorts of educational stuff going on, you've got people turning up, left, right and centre, of all hues and colours, dressed in different ways, shapes and forms, and you've got engagement with the local community, politicians and police, blah blah blah. I think that's that is the role of the mosque, right? To be that melting pot where total Islam is manifest, and this is the fulcrum point. This is the quarterback from which all the plays of the community are made. But if we don't teach our Muslim leadership and our imams and our scholars about that, if their understanding of Islam is completely warped, and their understanding of Islam is is constrained by culture and is constrained by historical kind of ossified hierarchies around what Islam is, and that's what is being like rigidly taught, and that's what's being safeguarded, and that's what's just no one's kind of being let outside of that. Then what ends up happening is that over time the community is already over here. The community is already listening to music. It's watching pornography. It's eating riba. There's boyfriends and girlfriends. Girls are taking off their hijab. Community is already there, and sure, they might be doing that 90% of the time. But the Jummah, when they come in with the topi and the jubba on, you feel like, oh right, okay, so at least we've protected this little space, and everything looks right, but it isn't right, and that's because they have failed to understand that what we need to be adopting is total Islam, not just Islam for 40 years ago.
So do you think a key reason why, like you've mentioned them 5 big problems within our youth, is that are you saying one of the key reasons is we haven't taught them total Islam? We basically taught them, if you do X, Y, Z, not even if you do X, Y, Z, you'll go Jannah. If you don't do X, Y, Z, you'll go Jahannam. That's what kind of we get taught even when we're younger. Rather than saying Islam isn't just Salah, it's not just Quran, it's not just dhikr, it's a whole load of other things which translate into your 24-hour daily life. For example, providing for a family, building something beneficial for the community. All of them is part of Islam, which I've never heard when I was younger in the masjid. But do you think the lack of that teaching and the teaching of just hardcore right and wrong is one of the main factors?
Yeah, I think there's the connecting fibers that actually hold together the idea of Islam, submission to the Almighty. That's what's missing. If you ask the average person on the street, average Muslim on the street in Forest Gate, let's say, I don't know if I should pick on Forest Gate, but anywhere in East London, and you ask them, what does Islam actually mean? Why do you believe in God? I get that you go to Jummah. I get that you know roughly about the 5 prayers, but why do you actually believe in God? Do you believe in God, right? And if those really fundamental questions are not answered, like why do we do Salah? Why do we believe in Allah, right?
Why do we fast?
What is Islam, right? These are the kind of key things. And then, of course, all of the 5 pillars, right, would kick in. But if these core things are not even in place, then there's nothing that actually, there's no scaffolding on which they can hang their Islam onto, and then explaining to them Islam in a way that allows them to see that actually it's a part of all of our life, and it's not this kind of ritualistic thing which they don't understand in isolation why we do what we do. Like, for example, if someone, when they were if an alien comes to Earth and he sees someone in the car constantly doing the shoulder checks, or doing the shoulder checks, he'd be like, what's that all about? He needs to understand the wider context in order for him to realize actually this is a good idea, right? And yet when we teach Islam, we are teaching our kids that, okay, when you cut your nails, you start with the right hand, you should do these fingers first, then your left hand, and then you should do the thumb, right? That's the sunnah way that we're taught. And if you don't, then you're a bad person. That's like the shoulder check. We've told them to do the shoulder check, but we haven't told them why. And until we tell them why, that's a problem. I picked this fingernail example because it's particularly hard to get your head around. Like, what is it about? Why is it that doing it this way is somehow pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and doing it another way isn't? What is so special about that?
What is so special about it?
So,
Because I know my dad also, you put your hand in dua and you start from here and end in here, so you go around.
all right, interesting. So I think it's to my mind, it goes back to first the hadith. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يعجب وتيمن في تنعله وترجله وتهوره وفي شأن كله. Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم, he used to prefer to start on the right, and that's what he would do. So, the right would make sense as a result of that. And then if you've been taught a specific way by the sunnah, the prophetic way of doing something, then even an act as mundane as cutting your fingernails, amongst the thousands of other acts that we have guidance from Islam about, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on, this becomes raised from an act of mundanity and an act of just, cleanliness to something that is an act of worship that is actually bringing you closer to an awareness of Him, the Almighty. And that is where we're constantly striving for, right? When we're leaving the house, when we are getting into a car, even when, we are engaging in marital ties, right? To that point, why is it that we're doing a dua at that point? It's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and this idea that we are His servant and every action of ours and every limb of ours should be serving Him, right? In salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mati lillahi rabbil alameen. My salah, Ibrahim alayhi salam is making this that my salah, salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya, my sacrifice, and mahyaya wa mati, my living and my dying, is lillahi rabbil alameen, is solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's total Islam, right? It's the same kind of philosophy comes back. Fingernails is part of total Islam. But what we are doing is we're teaching the artifacts, the symbology of total Islam, but without actually having any of the connective tissue that explains why this is a wonderful way of life.
So then does that way of life tie into your mission in Curate Capital?
100%.
And how does it tie in?
Every single thing that we see around us, there are layers of meaning associated with it. When you see a body, you see the nervous system, you see the skin, you see the blood system, you see the skeleton underneath. As kids, we see that diagram. It's the same with our society, where we have the layer of relationships. We've got the layer of commerce and finance, right? So that's the layer that we operate in. You have multiple other layers as well. The layer of, just the sheer biology, right? The healthcare and, the care aspect of it. You've got the layer of ideas, which is education, and possibly media, right? You've got the layer of power, right? Which is, I guess, politics and what have you. All of these compressed together into creating the tiramisu of life. And what we do is we just operate on our one little layer, which is the finances and investing side. And we want to try and think about reimagining what is it that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He want from us in creating a perfect society? And in that perfect society, in this perfect tiramisu, what does that financial layer actually look like? And let's now actively work in a step-by-step way towards getting from where we are today to getting to that point. And you might say to me, okay, well, Ibrahim, that's good, but you are an investment firm, right? You've laid out this wonderful picture. How do you translate what you do to that? Well, the way we do that is, firstly, I've written quite a detailed white paper on what a truly Islamic financial system would look like. And I invite everyone in each of their own domains that they should engage in this activity as well, which is what is the ideal that we're trying to aspire towards in whatever area it is that we are in. And then practically how we're going to get there. And to my mind, how we get there, Islamic, this wonderful Islamic, financial system where, we have prosperity, we don't have riba, we have a banking system that looks very different, we have a much reduced inequality between people, we have a system where you've got the non-profit sector, which is actually much larger, and the awqaf are much larger and supporting a lot more of the economy. You've got this entire thing going on, and that's very different to where we are today. How do we map out where the path to there? And that's why I set out in the white paper. But really briefly, it looks like we manage 150 odd million today. In order for us to achieve what we want to achieve, we really should be a top 10 asset manager globally, which means that we need to be managing at least 1.8 trillion to even be
So
number
you're not
10.
even 1% yet.
What's that?
You're not even 1%.
We're nowhere. We're nowhere. And so that's just table stakes. And on that journey, we will probably need to be influencing, and a very key factor of it is influencing the way the monetary system is. And for that's why you need scale, because once you get to a certain level of scale, you can actually have those conversations with government and people who are in charge of the monetary system, try and change how banking works. Now, along the way, though, what you can also immediately do is start directing the sluice gates of commerce in ways that mean that the money that is flowing is not flowing to the same old places that it's always been flowing. Because it's like, an irrigation system in Pakistan, Bangladesh, or India, where, if you cut off the pipe to a field, that field won't grow. But if you double the pipe to somewhere else, that field will grow much faster. And what we are doing with our money is we earned it with a lot of difficulty, but then we direct it straight into the banking system, and we direct it straight into the US economy, into stocks and shares. And frankly, that's where the bulk of it actually sits, either in the banking system or US stocks. Now, I'm not saying the US stocks in particular is all bad, but what I am saying is that is just going to create a world as it has been today. That is the status quo. If we're going to change that, then you and I, when we make our investments, they need to be circling back. This goes back to your whole point about the circular economy. They need to be circling back to entrepreneurs in our community. They need to be circling back to building houses and providing the home financing for our community. They need to be circling back to actually solving, some of the other charitable, related issues or issues that charities deal with. They need to be coming back to do that. But instead, what we are doing is 90%, well, maybe not 90%, but a big chunk of our money is sat in a bank in cash. And that is then used to finance all sorts of things, sometimes good, but often bad. It's used to underpin the entire banking system, which itself is deeply troublesome and, fosters inequality. That's actually where our money is going and being used for. That's not hyperbole. That is fact.
Is that the video you just released?
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's right. And so we need to change that. And until we do change that, then our mission is unfulfilled.
So right now, let's just say Muhammad has £100 in his account. From that £100, £90 is going to be used. At least £90 will be used in giving out loans and mortgages, etc. Basically fueling the interest-based system. So in an Islamic economy, Muhammad has £100 in the bank. What happens next?
So in an Islamic economy, Muhammad has £100 in a bank, but a bank is not the way it is today. A bank is, you may pay for the bank, right? You may pay the bank, let's say, a £5 annual monthly subscription or annual subscription. And the bank, let's take a sidebar. What is a bank? In a bank, you actually lend the bank money. You don't deposit money with the bank. The relationship there is an on-demand deposit. What is this on-demand thing? The reason is because you are lending money to the bank, and on demand you can take that loan back out. And so as a result of that loan to the bank gives you interest on top of that, but not very much, if any, sometimes. And the bank does that. Why? Because it's a charity? No, of course not. The bank does that because it likes the use of your money. Because with that money, it can magnify it up to become 100x that money using fractional reserve and using the way that the financial system is today. And then it can give out a whole load of loans to people buying houses or businesses or whatever other else, things that it might want to do. And so your money, when it's sat there, now coming back to, what do you call him?
Muhammad,
right? So Muhammad, when your money is sat there, that is now you were talking about what would it look like in the Islamic economy. So here, in the Islamic economy, the one thing that a bank does do, which we do need, right, is the fact that it has payment rails, where when we place the money with the bank, we can use a card, we can use our bank apps to be able to wire money left, right, and center and make payments. And banks, for retail customers, it just provides that effectively for free. For businesses, as we know, it charges you for that, right? But even then, it doesn't probably charge you enough for that. It's kind of providing a service still. And so in this new world, Muhammad would have to pay £5 for the use of payment rails. But it's very clear, his money isn't being used for anything else. His money isn't being secretly used to give out highly controversial loans. And then, when Northern Rock collapses, that his money disappears. None of that's happening. Very clear. I'm just using you for payment rails. That's it. And you're paying paid for that service. Now, Muhammad might then take a portion of that and put it into investments. Now, because there is no magnification happening anymore in this new world, where money isn't created through the issuance of debt. And so banks don't have this power of effectively creating new money and being able to give out far more loans than there is actually real money. When all of that that white elephant has been slaughtered, or that whole taboo has been broken, you actually end up with a very different world where banks think, hang on a second, it's not really beneficial for me to really be doing this kind of activity anymore. I am going to start, giving out a lot more aggressively, financing businesses and financing this and that and the other. And actually, if you look at what HSBC, Barclays, NatWest, and which is the other one, Lloyds, they do, the majority of their work is actually just giving out home finance. And if they can't do that, they'll just sit on it and they'll just, just earn interest with the Bank of England. They don't give out enough commercial finance. And actually backing entrepreneurs, either through equity or debt, is one of the fundamental ways that an economy starts growing. And so you'll see a lot more of that, I think, in this Islamic economy. And then the story goes on. But that should hopefully give you a sense of the difference.
How far away do you think we are to actually even having something like that?
So we need to, it comes back to the initial steps that we need to take. So we back a lot of businesses through IFG and Curate Capital. We backed over 100 businesses so far. Some of them, I know, will inshallah and are succeeding spectacularly. Others will fail, but hopefully many of them will succeed. And we want to back those businesses, and we want to give them the Sharia compliant debt finance, that they need to be able to scale as well. And we're providing early stages of that, and we can do more, but that we're providing that. Those two things together then need to kind of scale in harmony, where you can actually get to a point where you have large listed companies that are Muslim, and Muslim ownership, and where for the first time you don't need a 30% debt to asset ratio, where you actually are investing in halal funds, but actually up to 30% of it you can actually take out haram loans. Like, what's that all about? It's a stopgap that scholars allow because there's no other alternative. But if you incubate and grow, hundreds of these companies from Muslim through and through, then you actually can list on the stock exchange all of these companies as well, and suddenly Muslims can have a fully halal alternative that they can invest in, right? And in that process, the economic power that comes with it, then enables one to be able to influence regulation, influence the change that you need to be able to change the way the financial system is. So those are the kind of some of the early steps that would need to be taken.
Have you watched the Netflix movie Bank of Dave?
No.
Okay, so he basically set up his own bank in Burnley.
All right.
But it was, I think they still had interest and everything, but the profits of the bank just went towards the community, and then he built up the community like that. It's actually very, very interesting, and he had to fight the big banks. So I see it. It's very similar to what you're saying in terms of we have these investment funds with smaller companies, and then like that we're growing them, and then even normal consumers can put their money in there as a stock exchange rather than leaving it in Lloyd's or Barclays. Can we also have gold as a currency? Do you think that is feasible, having a gold debit card?
I think it's a really interesting idea. I think that what you can't do is jump the gun on the ordering. What I mean by that is right now gold is not seen as a currency. Gold is seen as a store of value, some kind of investment, right? And so it goes up and down in value. It's highly volatile. It's not really seen as a medium of exchange anymore. And so the things that are priced in the real world are priced in pounds. They're not priced in gold. And the things that you are buying and selling, you're buying and selling in pounds. You're not buying and selling them in gold. So in order for you to jump the gun and say, all right, actually, you know what, gold is the underlying thing that we want to go back to. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. For, you and I can't have our salaries, starting off, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000, and in some months it's actually 5,000. Some months it's worth 1,500 because we need to pay our rent, and that's not going to change. But is there a world where we and this is possibly above my pay grade, right? Where I think we need economists and possibly scholars to look at it. Is the way that a new currency, a new system of currency is set up, does it necessarily need to be underpinned by something like gold or not? I personally actually don't think it does. I think that gold isn't something kind of religious. There's nothing religious about gold. I think we give value to it in the same way that we give value to currency, pounds. There's nothing intrinsically like magical about gold. It's just a piece of metal, right? We like it because it's shiny and it has certain qualities, but that's about it. We're not actually using it for those qualities. We're just using it because historically we've liked it, and that's it. So if we start ascribing the same value to wood instead, this becomes as valuable as gold. So my view is, this is kind of going down a tangent, but I don't think that gold, we necessarily need to underpin all of our currencies by gold. It just needs to be a mechanism that everyone can trust.
Okay, one final thing before we finish. What legacy do you think every Muslim entrepreneur should want to leave behind?
I think it's probably different for each entrepreneur. I think for me, I would love to be able to say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that what I have done in my life was the catalyst, or at least I had the intention that it brings back the Muslim community to a level, financial playing field. It might not necessarily happen in my lifetime, but if I can leave this as a legacy where perhaps it happens many hundreds of years later, maybe even long after I've gone, but something somewhere that I did catalyze that process, I think that would be pretty good.
Inshallah, maybe we'll see that in a few years or in a few hundred years. We don't know.
We'll find out.
Ibrahim, Jazakallah khair. It's been a pleasure as always. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.